Welcome to Spotlight Murders, the show where we crack open the sealed vaults of Hollywood's most chilling mysteries. I'm your host, Kieran Caldwell, and today we're diving into one of the most heartbreaking and shocking tragedies in entertainment history. A story that ripped apart the laughter and left a family shattered. It's May 28th, 1998, the day the world lost Phil Hartman, a comedy legend whose quick wit and iconic characters made millions laugh. But behind the scenes, a darker story was unfolding, one that would culminate in a murder-suicide no one saw coming. Phil wasn't just a Saturday Night Live star or a beloved voice in animation. He was a man with a complex personal life, caught in a toxic web of addiction, jealousy, and despair. The person who should have been his greatest protector became his ultimate destroyer. That morning in their home, the curtain fell on a life full of humor, brilliance, and promise, replaced by silence and heartbreak that would echo through Hollywood for decades. This isn't just a story about fame or fame's pitfalls. It's about love turned deadly, about the fragile lines between laughter and tragedy, and about secrets families keep behind closed doors. So dim the lights, press play, and join us as we uncover the sorrow, the scandal, and the silence surrounding the final hours of Phil Hartman's life. Because once you hear what happened behind the scenes, you'll never see Saturday Night Live the same way again. Philip Edward Hartman entered this world on September 24th, 1948, in Brantford, Ontario, Canada. Picture this: a large Catholic family with 8 children, where getting noticed meant you had to be loud, funny, or both. Phil chose funny. Even as a young boy, he understood that humor was his ticket to attention and affection in a crowded household. This wasn't just child's play. This was survival training for what would become one of the most versatile careers in comedy history. When Phil was 10, his family made the life-changing move to Southern California. Think about that transition, from small-town Canada to the vibrant, sun-soaked landscape of 1950s California. It was here that Phil truly found his voice, literally and figuratively. He became the class clown, perfecting impressions and developing those unique character voices that would later make him indispensable to Saturday Night Live. But here's what's fascinating about Phil Hartman. He didn't start as a performer. After high school, he enrolled at California State University, Northridge, studying graphic arts. This wasn't a detour from his destiny, it was preparation for it. Phil became a successful graphic designer, creating album covers for major 1970s bands like Poco and America. His crowning achievement? Designing the iconic logo for Crosby, Stills, and Nash. He was living the rock and roll lifestyle, touring with bands, fully immersed in that creative world. Yet something was missing. In 1975, Phil attended a Groundlings show, that legendary Los Angeles improv comedy troupe, and everything clicked. This was his calling. He auditioned successfully and quickly became a standout member. It was at the Groundlings where Phil helped develop one of the most iconic characters in comedy history, Pee Wee Herman, working alongside Paul Reubens. Think about Phil's skill set at this point: graphic design precision, musical timing from his rock world experience, and natural comedic instincts. This combination would prove lethal in the best possible way. 1986 changed everything. Phil Hartman joined Saturday Night Live, and comedy history was made. For 8 seasons, he became known as the Glue. Not the flashiest performer, not the biggest ego, but the one who held everything together. When SNL needed someone reliable, someone who could nail any impression or character, they turned to Phil. His range was absolutely staggering. Bill Clinton, nailed it. Frank Sinatra, perfection. Ronald Reagan, Ed McMahon. He disappeared into these roles completely. But Phil didn't just do impressions. He created characters that became SNL legends. The anal retentive chef, teaching viewers how to properly organize their spice racks with neurotic precision. The unfrozen caveman lawyer, a brilliant satire of legal manipulation. Your world frightens and confuses me. What made Phil special wasn't just his talent, it was his professionalism. While other cast members fought for spotlight time or threw tantrums, Phil showed up, did the work, and made everyone around him better. He won an Emmy for his writing, proving he was more than just a performer. He was a complete comedy craftsman. The film work followed naturally. Pee-wee's Big Adventure, So I Married an Axe Murderer, Coneheads, Jingle All the Way. Phil brought that same precision and reliability to the big screen. But perhaps his most beloved film work was his voice acting on The Simpsons. Troy McClure, the washed-up actor who introduced himself with, "Hi, I'm Troy McClure. You may remember me from such films as..." And Lionel Hutz, the incompetent lawyer who worked on a contingency basis. No, money down. These characters showcased Phil's ability to find humor in failure and desperation while making us love these flawed individuals. Then came News Radio in 1995. Phil's role as Bill McNeil, the arrogant, self-important radio news anchor, was perfect for him. Here was a character who allowed Phil to blend everything he did best: timing, arrogance, absurdity, and surprising moments of charm. Once again, he became the stabilizing force in an ensemble cast, the reliable center around which chaos could safely orbit. Outside of work, Phil was a Renaissance man. He surfed, sailed, fished, and flew planes. He played guitar and maintained deep appreciation for visual arts. Remember, he never lost that graphic designer's eye. Colleagues described him as kind, professional, and modest. There was a quiet, introspective quality to Phil that stood in interesting contrast to his comedic personas. He seemed to save his emotional energy for his craft, maintaining a serene dignity in his personal interactions. But while Phil's professional life soared, his personal life was becoming a nightmare. Enter Bryn Omdahl, an aspiring actress and model who would become Bryn Hartman, and ultimately his killer. Their marriage started normally enough, but it quickly devolved into something toxic and dangerous. Bryn exhibited behavior that went far beyond typical jealousy. This was obsessive, irrational, and frankly, terrifying. Yes, Phil had acknowledged past infidelity and could be flirtatious. He was, after all, a charismatic performer. But Bryn's reactions were extreme and controlling in ways that should have raised red flags for everyone around them. Let me give you an example that perfectly illustrates Bryn's mental state. After their son Sean was born, Phil's ex-wife, Lisa, sent a simple, congratulatory card, a normal gesture between mature adults who shared history. Bryn's response? She wrote a multi-page letter filled with graphic death threats, demanding Lisa cease all contact with Phil. But it didn't stop there. Bryn also drafted threatening letters to Phil's former Saturday Night Live colleagues, including Jan Hooks. She was paranoid about anyone who had a close relationship with Phil. While she never sent these letters, their very existence revealed a deeply disturbed psyche. Bryn battled chronic depression and severe anger issues. Her solution? Cocaine and marijuana. This wasn't recreational drug use. This was self-medication that only made her emotional volatility worse. The fights with Phil became so intense and frequent that he would sometimes remove their children from the house for their safety. Imagine that, a father having to protect his own children from their mother's drug-fueled rages. Yet somehow, they maintained a facade of normalcy. Friends had no idea of the chaos behind closed doors. This speaks to Phil's professionalism and perhaps his misguided loyalty. He was protecting Bryn's reputation even as she was destroying their family. The early 1990s brought Phil tremendous success, but also relocated the family to Los Angeles when he landed the news radio role. They purchased a $1.4 million mansion in Encino, a dream house that would become the site of unspeakable tragedy. While Phil thrived professionally, Bryn struggled with her own career ambitions. She took acting lessons, underwent cosmetic procedures, and Phil actively helped her seek roles. But the rejections piled up, and each disappointment deepened her resentment toward Phil's success. This is where the tragedy becomes almost inevitable. You have one partner achieving their dreams, while the other faces constant failure, all while addiction eats away at her judgment and emotional regulation. Bryn did attempt treatment. She went to rehab, including a stay in Arizona. She sought psychiatric help, but addiction is a formidable enemy, and by late 1997, she had relapsed. There are reports that News Radio cast member Andy Dick supplied her with cocaine at a Christmas party, though this remains disputed. Regardless of how it happened, the relapse sent Bryn into a deeper spiral. Phil tried everything to save their marriage. They maintained weekly date nights, attempting to preserve some normalcy. But underneath these gestures, the relationship was rotting. Phil began issuing ultimatums: get clean and stay in rehab, or face divorce and lose custody of their children. Imagine Phil's position. Here's a man at the height of his career, beloved by millions, respected by his peers, financially successful, and he's living in constant fear of his own wife. The stress created a destructive cycle: hope followed by relapse, followed by explosive arguments, followed by temporary peace, and then the cycle would begin again. By May 1998, Phil was exhausted. Bryn was increasingly isolated and unstable. Their children were living in a war zone disguised as a mansion. May 27, 1998, their 11th wedding anniversary. What should have been a celebration became the prelude to tragedy. The day started with a misunderstanding that perfectly encapsulated their relationship's dysfunction. Phil thought their weekly date night was scheduled for the following evening. Bryn expected it that night. This simple miscommunication ignited a heated argument, because in a relationship already saturated with tension, every small issue becomes explosive. Phil left home to shop and clear his head. Bryn also went out, leaving their children with a nanny. Each was escaping the other, seeking space to breathe. But sometimes space isn't enough when the fundamental problems remain unresolved. Bryn had dinner with Christine Zander, a television producer and writer. Christine later noted that despite Bryn's marital difficulties, she seemed optimistic about future opportunities. But addiction was lurking. Christine noticed Bryn make a suspicious phone call during dinner, likely arranging to buy drugs. After dinner, Bryn drove to the home of Ron Douglas, a friend and former lover. This relationship itself reveals something about the Hartman marriage's dysfunction. Bryn was maintaining intimate friendships with former romantic partners while being pathologically jealous of Phil's professional relationships. At Ron's house, they shared beers, and Bryn vented about her marital problems. She tried calling Phil, but got no response. He was probably avoiding her, knowing any conversation would likely become an argument. Ron, sensing potential trouble, encouraged Bryn to return home by midnight. He could see she was in a dangerous emotional state. Bryn returned home around 1 a.m. She was intoxicated, emotionally volatile, and according to later toxicology reports, had consumed cocaine and alcohol. She was also taking Zoloft, an antidepressant that, when mixed with alcohol and drugs, can cause severe disorientation and emotional detachment. What happened next can only be pieced together from evidence and Sean's later testimony. Phil and Bryn engaged in what would be their final argument. According to Phil's friend and lawyer, Steve Small, Phil likely issued his ultimatum again: return to rehabilitation or face divorce and loss of custody. Phil, following his usual pattern, retreated from the confrontation and went to bed. He probably hoped that sleep would diffuse the situation. That morning might bring clarity. He had no way of knowing that Bryn was spiraling into a drug-induced psychosis. Bryn remained awake, continuing to consume cocaine and alcohol. Her mental state was deteriorating rapidly. At some point before 3 a.m., she made a decision that would destroy multiple lives. She retrieved a .38 caliber pistol from their gun safe. What was going through her mind? Was it rage at Phil's success? Desperation about her own failures? Fear of losing her children? Paranoid delusions caused by the drug cocktail in her system? We'll never know for certain, but the result was catastrophic. Under the influence of drugs and consumed by emotional turmoil, Bryn entered their bedroom where Phil lay sleeping. Without warning, without giving him any chance to defend himself or even wake up, she fired 3 shots. The bullets hit his chest, neck, and head. Phil Hartman, comedy genius and beloved father, died instantly at age 49. Their children were asleep upstairs. Sean later recalled hearing what he thought was a door slamming, followed by his mother's distressed cries. Can you imagine? 2 young children, unaware that their world had just been destroyed forever. After committing this horrific act, Bryn fled to Ron Douglas's house in a state of shock and panic. She arrived at his door carrying the weight of what she'd done, and according to Ron, she made a confession that he initially couldn't believe. I killed Phil. I don't know why. Think about Ron's position. Here's someone he cared about, known for erratic behavior and dramatic statements, telling him she'd committed murder. His first instinct was disbelief. Bryn had a history of making extreme claims during emotional episodes. But as he looked at her more closely, as he processed her genuine distress and the gun that had fallen from her purse, the horrible truth began to sink in. Ron spent the early morning hours trying to sober Bryn up, hoping to make sense of what she was telling him. By around 6 a.m., he believed she was stable enough to return home. Bryn insisted he accompany her back to the house, a request that would make Ron a witness to one of Hollywood's most shocking crime scenes. When they arrived at the Encino mansion, Ron entered first and made his way to the master bedroom. What he found there would haunt him forever. Phil Hartman's lifeless body, the man who had made millions off, lying motionless in bed where he should have been safe. Overcome with horror and disbelief, Ron immediately called 911. But Bryn had isolated herself in the master bedroom with Phil's body. She was unreachable, lost in a haze of shock, drugs, and the reality of what she'd done. Police arrived at approximately 6:20 a.m., having already received reports from neighbors about gunshots in the area. The scene that greeted them was heartbreaking. 9-year-old Sean and 6-year-old Bergen standing at the house's entrance in their pajamas, scared and confused, but mercifully unaware of the full scope of the tragedy that had occurred inside their home. As officers entered the premises, they could hear movement from the master bedroom where Bryn had barricaded herself. In what would be her final act, Bryn made a phone call to her sister, a tearful farewell in which she asked her sister to take care of her children. It was perhaps her only moment of clarity in those final hours, a brief recognition that her children would need care and protection from what was coming next. Then, as police drew closer to the bedroom, another gunshot echoed through the house. Bryn had used the same .38 caliber Charter Arms undercover revolver to end her own life. The murder-suicide was complete, leaving 2 children orphaned and an entertainment community in shock. The toxicology report painted a clear picture of Bryn's state that night. Her blood alcohol level was well beyond the legal limit. She had cocaine in her system. She was taking Zoloft, an antidepressant that can cause dangerous side effects when combined with alcohol and other drugs. This chemical cocktail had created a perfect storm of impaired judgment, emotional volatility, and violent impulses. In the aftermath of this tragedy, several theories emerged about Bryn's motivations and actions. Some focused on her visit to Ron Douglas with the murder weapon still in her possession. Was this a calculated attempt to frame him for Phil's murder? Or was it a desperate reach for human connection, a confused attempt to confess to someone she trusted? Ron vehemently denied any foreknowledge of Bryn's plans or any involvement in the murder. His shock and horror upon discovering Phil's body appeared genuine to investigators. But questions remained about why Bryn chose to involve him, what her mental state truly was, and whether she had any coherent plan beyond the initial act of violence. The Hartman family later filed a lawsuit focusing on the potential side effects of Zoloft, arguing that the pharmaceutical company had inadequately communicated the risks of mixing the antidepressant with alcohol and other substances. While the lawsuit was eventually settled without the company admitting wrongdoing, it highlighted the dangerous cocktail of medications and substances that had contributed to Bryn's final breakdown. Some observers pointed to jealousy and resentment as primary motivators. Bryn had watched Phil achieve everything she wanted for herself: fame, success, respect, financial security, while her own dreams crumbled. The contrast between their professional trajectories had become a source of constant tension and bitter arguments. Others emphasized the role of addiction and mental illness, arguing that Bryn was not fully in control of her actions that night. The combination of chronic depression, substance abuse, and prescription medication side effects had created a mental state in which violence became possible, even inevitable. The murder of Phil Hartman sent shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond. Here was a man universally beloved for his kindness, professionalism, and comedic genius, killed by the person who should have loved and protected him most. The tragedy highlighted the hidden darkness that can exist behind even the most successful public facades. News Radio, which had been renewed for a 5th season, had to grapple with the loss of its central character. The show addressed Phil's death by having Bill McNeil die of a heart attack, and while the series continued, it was never the same. How could it be? Saturday Night Live, where Phil had been such a crucial part of the ensemble, dedicated episodes to his memory. Fellow cast members struggled to process the loss of someone who had been both a mentor and stabilizing presence during their time together. The Simpsons faced a particularly difficult decision regarding Phil's characters, Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz. Rather than recasting these roles, the show's creators chose to retire them entirely, feeling that Phil's contribution was irreplaceable. It was a tribute that spoke to the unique quality he brought to everything he touched. Phil and Bryn's children, Sean and Bergen, were raised by Bryn's sister Catherine and her husband Mike Wright. The family worked to shield them from the public scrutiny and help them process an unimaginable trauma. Both children have largely stayed out of the public eye, choosing to build private lives away from the shadow of their parents' tragedy. The Phil Hartman tragedy remains one of Hollywood's most shocking and senseless crimes. It's the story of extraordinary talent destroyed by addiction, mental illness, and toxic relationships. It's a reminder that success and public adoration cannot protect someone from private demons and domestic violence. Phil Hartman left behind a remarkable legacy of laughter and creativity. His impressions, characters, and comedic timing continue to influence performers today. But his death also serves as a stark warning about the dangers of unchecked addiction and the importance of recognizing signs of domestic abuse, even in relationships that appear successful from the outside. The man who made millions laugh died in the one place where he should have been safest, his own bedroom, at the hands of someone he loved. It's a tragedy that reminds us how fragile life can be, how quickly everything can change, and how the people closest to us sometimes carry the greatest capacity for both love and destruction. Phil Hartman was 49 years old when he died, still at the height of his creative powers, still beloved by fans and respected by colleagues. We can only imagine what other characters he might have created, what other laughs he might have generated, what other joy he might have brought to the world. Instead, we're left with the work he completed, the memories of those who knew him, and a sobering reminder that behind every public figure is a private person dealing with struggles we may never fully understand. You've heard the laughter, the tragedy, and the heartbreak that close the final chapter on Phil Hartman's life. But this story holds many more layers, painful truths, and hidden details that only deepen the mystery. To explore the full story of Phil Hartman's death, download the Skoob app on the App Store or Google Play. Unlock the complete experience and join us as we shine a light on the darkness behind the spotlight. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Hollywood's shadows. Until next time, this has been Spotlight Murders. Stay curious, stay cautious, and never forget the stories behind the smiles.